Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read S5 5076 Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Chapter 6 The Queen's Game of Croquet. Near the door there was a rose tree and three gardeners who were looking at the roses in a very worried way. "What's the matter?" Alice said to them. "You see, miss," said the first gardener, "those roses are white, but the Queen only likes red roses." "And she, the Queen?" said the second gardener. Suddenly and at once the three gardeners lay down flat on their faces. Alice turned round and saw a great crowd of people, with a pack of cards walking through the garden. They were clubs, they were soldiers, and diamonds, and 10 little children, they were hearts. Next came some kings and queens. Then Alice saw the white rabbit, and behind him the knave of hearts. And last of all came the king and queen of hearts. When the crowd came near to Alice, they all stopped and looked at her, and the queen said, "Who are you?" "My name is Alice, your majesty," said Alice very politely, but she thought to herself, "They are only a pack of cards. I don't need to be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the queen, looking at the three gardeners. Then she saw the white roses, and her face turned red and angry. "Off with their heads!" she shouted, and soldiers hurried up to take the gardeners away. The queen turned to Alice. "Can you play croquet?" she shouted. "Yes," shouted Alice. "Come on then." The crowd began to move on, and Alice went with them. "It's a very fine day," said the worried voice in her ear. Alice saw that the white rabbit was by her side. "Very fine," said Alice. "Where is the Duchess?" "She," said the rabbit in a hurried voice. "She's in prison waiting for execution." "What for?" said Alice. But just then the queen shouted, "Get to your places," and the game began. It was the strangest game of croquet in Alice's life. The balls were hedgehogs, and the mallets were flamingos, and the hoops were made by soldiers who turned over and stood on their hands and feet. Alice held the flamingo's body under her arm, but the flamingo turned its long neck first this way and that way. At last Alice was ready to hit the ball with the flamingo's head. But by then Hedgehog was tired of waiting, was walking away across the croquet ground, and both the flamingo and the hedgehog were ready. There was no hoop. The soldiers too were always getting up and walking away. It really was a very difficult game, Alice thought. The players all played at the same time, and they were always arguing and fighting for hedgehog. Nobody could agree about anything. Very soon, the queen was wildly angry and went around shouting, "Off with his head and off with her head," about once a minute. Alice began to feel worried. "The queen is sure to argue with me soon. And what will happen to me then? They're cutting people's heads off all the time here. I'm surprised there is anyone left alive." Just then she saw something very strange. She watched carefully. After a minute or two, she saw that the thing was a green. "It's the Cheshire cat," she said to herself. "I'll have somebody to talk to." "How are you getting on?" said the cat when its mouth appeared. Alice waited. "I can't talk to something without ears." She thought slowly. The cat's eyes and its ears, and the rest of its head appeared, but it stopped at the neck. Its body did not appear. Alice began to tell the cat all about the game. "It's very difficult to play," she said. "Everybody argues all the time, and the hoops and the hedgehogs walk away." "How do you like the queen?" said the cat quietly. "Oh, boy." The queen smiled and walked past. "Who are you talking to?" said the king. He came up behind Alice and looked at the cat's head in surprise. "It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire cat," said Alice. "I'm not sure that I like it," said the king, "but it can touch my hand if it likes. I prefer not to." "Well," said the king angrily, he called out to the queen, "My dear, there's a cat here, and I don't like it." The queen did not look around. "Off with its head," she shouted. "Call for the executioner." Alice was a little worried for her friend, but when the executioner arrived, everyone began to argue. "I can't cut off a head," said the executioner, "if there isn't a body to cut it off from." "You can't cut the head off," said the king, "from anything that's got a head. If somebody doesn't do something quickly, I cut everybody's head off." Nobody liked that plan very much, so they all turned to Alice. "And what do you say?" they cried. "The cat belongs to a duchess," said Alice carefully. "Perhaps you could ask her about it." "She's in prison," the queen said to the executioner. "Bring her here at once." Cat's head slowly began to vanish, and when the executioner came back with the duchess, there was nothing there. The king ran wildly up and down looking for the cat, and the duchess put her arm around Alice. "I'm so pleased to see you again, my dear. Let's get on with the game." Alice followed her back to the croquet ground. The game went on, but all the time the queen was arguing, shouting off with his head or off with her head. And there were no hoops left, because the soldiers were too busy taking everybody to prison. At the end, there were only 3 players left, the king, the queen, and Alice. Queen stopped shouting and said to Alice, "Have you seen the mock turtle yet?" "No, I'm not sure what a mock turtle is." "Then come with me." They found the mock turtle down by the sea. Next to him was a Griffin asleep in the sun, and the queen hurried away, saying, "I have to get on with some execution." The Griffin woke up and said sleepily to Alice, "It's just talk, you know. They never execute anybody." Alice was pleased to hear this. She felt a little afraid of the Griffin and the mock turtle, because they were so large. They were very friendly and sang songs, told many stories about their life. The mock turtle was in the middle of a very sad song. When they all heard a shout a long way away, "It's beginning. Come on, we must hurry," cried the Griffin. He took Alice by the hand and began to run. Who stole the torch? The king and queen of hearts were sitting on the thrones when Alice and the Griffin arrived. There was a great crowd of birds and animals, and all the pack of cars. Soldiers stood all around the knave of hearts. And near the king was the white rabbit, with a trumpet in one hand. In the middle of the room, there was a table with a large plate of tarts on it. They looked good, thought Alice, who was feeling a little hungry. Then the white rabbit called out loudly, "Silence! The trial of the knave of hearts will now begin." He took out a long piece of paper and read, "The queen of hearts. She made some tarts, all on a summer day. The knave of hearts, he stole those tarts and took them all away." "Very good. Call the first witness." Alice looked at the jury, who were now writing everything down. It was a very strange jury. Some of the jurymen were animals, and the others were birds. The white rabbit blew his trumpet 3 times and called out, "First witness, the hatter." He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other hand. "I'm very sorry, Your Majesty. I was in the middle of tea when the trial began." "Take off your hat," said the king. "It isn't mine," said the hatter. "Stolen, write it down," the king said to the jury. "I keep hats to sell. I don't have a hat myself. I'm a hatter. I'll give you evidence, or we'll cut your head off." The hatter's face turned white. "I'm a poor man, Your Majesty," he began in a shaking voice. Just then Alice had a strange feeling. After a minute or two, she understood what it was. "Don't push like that," said Dormouse, who was sitting next to her. "I'm nearly falling off my seat." "I'm very sorry," Alice said politely. "I'm getting bigger and taller, you see." "Well, you can't do that here," said Dormouse crossly, and he got up and moved to another seat. The hatter was still giving evidence, but nobody could understand a word of it. The king looked at the queen, and the queen looked at the executioner. The unhappy hatter saw this and dropped his bread and butter. I'm a poor man, Your Majesty," he said again. "You're very poor speaker," said the king. He turned to the white rabbit. "Call the next witness." The next witness was the Duchess cook, who spoke very angrily and said they shouldn't give any evidence. The king looked worried and told the white rabbit to call another witness. Alice watched while the white rabbit looked at the names on his piece of paper. Then, to great surprise, he called out loudly, "Alice!" he cried, jumping to her feet. "What do you know about these tarts?" "Nothing," said Alice. The queen was looking hard at Alice. Now she said, "All people a mile high must leave the room." "I'm not a mile high, and I want to leave the room. I want to hear the evidence." There's no evidence. There's no more evidence," said the king very quickly. "Now the jury will." "Your Majesty," said the white rabbit, jumping up in a great hurry, "we have just found this letter. There's no name on it, but I think the knave wrote it." "No, I didn't," said the knave loudly, "but read it to us." "Where shall I begin, Your Majesty?" "Begin at the beginning," said the king, "and go on until you get to the end. Then stop." Everybody listened very carefully while the white rabbit read those words. "They tell me you have been to her and talked of me to him. She thought I was a gardener, but I said I could not swim. It tells him that I have not gone. We know that this is true. If she decides to hurry on, what will they do to you? I gave her 1. They gave him 2. You gave her 3 or more. They all returned from him to you. But they were mine before." "That's a very important piece of evidence," said the king. He looked very pleased. "Now the jury must If anybody in the jury can explain that letter, said Alice, I'll give him sixpence. It's all nonsense. Doesn't mean anything. The jury busily wrote this down. She thinks it's all nonsense. All nonsense, eh? Said the king. He read some of the words again, but said, I could not swim. You can't swim, can you? Said to the knave. The knave's face was sad. Do I look like a swimmer? He said. The king smiled. I understand everything now. He said, there are the tarts, and there is a knave of hearts. Now the jury must decide who the thief is. No, no, said the king, off with his head. The jury can say, what it thinks later. What nonsense, said Alice loudly. The jury must decide first. You can't. Be quiet, said the king. Her face turning red. I won, said Alice. Off with her head, screamed the king. Nobody moved. Doesn't matter what you say. You're only a pack of cards. Then the pack of cards flew up into the sky and began to fall on Alice's face. She gave a little scream and woke up. She was lying next to her sister under the trees, and some leaves were falling on her face. Wake up, Alice, dear. You've been asleep a long time. Yeah, I've had a very curious dream, said Alice, and she told her sister all about the strange adventures in a wonderful dream. The end.